Welcome to Neighbor. I'm your host today, Robin Stern, and we are lucky enough to have as our guest Timothy O'Connor. And Tim O'Connor has been an absolute landmark in this community, and he's decided to join us today and share some of his Brattleboro experiences. Tim, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I think the best way to start is really to just ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Did you grow up in Brattleboro? Tell us about your family, your work.
Yes. I grew up in Brattleboro. I will be 75 years old in December. So I've been around for a few years. And I wasn't born at the hospital. I was born at a unit of the hospital down where Richard's Insurance is on Harris Avenue. And I basically spent all of my life here except for the time when I was away at college and law school. And I haven't moved that far. I originally, with my parents, lived over on Grove Street. Then we moved up to Spruce Street. Then I moved over to High Lawn Road when I was first married. And in the last 45 years, I lived down here on Oak Street. So I am a real neighbor of Lynn Corum.
And did you find a foreign bride, or did you find a local bride?
No, I was lucky enough to find a local bride, my wife Martha. She was from the Hannum family in Putney. And
well, Putney may be considered foreign to Brattleboro.
Well, I always kid her and say that she was of the town organization as opposed to the town and gown. The gown was up on the Putney Hill. She lived down in the town. So, we've had 3 grown youngsters now, and I've been practicing law since 1961.
So with that history, you've certainly had the opportunity to observe Brattleboro over the decades and years. And what notable changes have you seen, first in the physical landscape in Brattleboro? If we pick a year or a decade in the 1950s, what would Main Street look like?
Well, Main Street in the 1950s was entirely different than it is now. If you start down at the so-called circle there, we're near the railroad station, and if you come north, the old Barrels building was one of the first buildings there. It was 4 stories. There was a big fire. That's now a 1-story. And you come up, Goodnow Pearson and Hunt was a tremendous department store, and that's gone. And there's a kind of a antique shop that's in that location. Interestingly enough, Baker's is still there. They've been in that spot for years. I know my dad used to say that he thought it started about 1928, so they've been around. And then you come up further on Main Street. When I was a youngster, Fishman's store, which was like the 5 and dime stores that were predominant in those days, was right on Main Street. And Michaelman's clothing store. And you can see the changes when you get up to where the Paramount was, the theater, which is now basically with the River Garden in there. And then next door to that, there used to be the auditorium. And that was a tremendous building as far as size-wise. It was where the town hall was. They had a movie theater in there. They had all of the police, treasurer's office, things like that.
So what was the municipal center used for?
That municipal center in those days, in the 50s, was used for the high school. So it was quite a dramatic change when the town took down the auditorium and moved everything up to the high school, the old high school. And then as you came along Main Street, where the Congo Church is, below that there was St. Michael's Episcopal Church. And in the late the late 50s, that was moved. The church itself was put up on blocks and moved with these great big trailers up to its present location on the corner of Bradley Avenue and Putney Road. And next to just north of the church, there was a house that was owned by the Clapp family, and that was taken down, and the addition to the present Center Congregational Church was built. So, and you come up, and then you got the present building out in back of what was in front the AMP store, which is now the Merchants building, which you and your husband share offices in.
Right.
And First Vermont Bank, the Averill House used to be there. I mean, it's amazing when I reflect on that, the changes. And the same thing happened on the other side of the street. The library, there were 2 houses that were taken down so that the library was built. So there have been a lot of physical changes. And of course you get into the argument, we should have preserved Main Street, we should have preserved the old houses, but I think there was certainly an interest in doing whatever they could do, but there was an interest in making it so that Brattleboro would be downtown and not out in some of the areas that it is now, which of course we know that happened in the 70s and the 80s, the Fairfield Plaza out on Putney Road, and then the plaza just above that, and then even on Canal Street, the shopping center out there.
So it's a bit of a balance to try to keep the historic aspects of the downtown, but allow it to grow and reflect what the needs are today.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So any changes that you're particularly fond of that you've seen in downtown?
Well, I think presently the uses that we have down there, except for perhaps the only men's store that we have is Miller Newton Brothers. And other than that, and I guess though we can't count out Sam's. Never count out Sam's. Sam's is a good store for men's clothes. But I understand, and I am out of the baby business now, and but I understand that could be a problem, in that some dry goods stores are not what they used to be. What
about the hardware store?
The hardware store,
Brown and
Roberts. There were 2 of them at the time, and they got together. I think the greatest move that they made when they took the old Montgomery Ward building next to the Baptist Church and made that as Brown and Roberts together.
And was that one of your first mergers and acquisitions in the legal business?
Yes, yes, it was.
So if you look at the business community over the years, and we have ongoing conversations in the town to try to make sure that the business community is viable and vibrant, again, what have you seen, and where do you think we're headed on the business front?
Well, I think one of the things that we are probably not going to be able to get back into, we lost the Hildreth Printing Company, and that's been replaced by the Harmony parking lot. And then we lost Vermont Print, and that building was in the old American building, and we lost the book press. And Brattleboro was a great printing area. A lot of people were working at those places, and they've either gotten into different careers or they found work in a smaller operation. But I don't think we're going to have the big size manufacturing built anymore. I think, and I think you probably have seen that people are coming from out of state. They want to be sure that they got a good education system in the town that they go to. They want to make sure that crime is at a minimum. And people are selecting Vermont because we do have those to offer, plus the fact that we have a nice environmental touch with everything you can do in the 4 seasons. Some people get a little upset about winter, but after you get through one winter, you get used to it.
Do people ever get used to mud season?
I don't think so. That's why I don't live out in the country, to be honest with you. But I think what we got to do is we got to definitely increase our availability of the broadband use of the internet and of the cell phone so that everybody can be reached. It's not as though you've got your cell phone and you go up to court in Newfane and somebody tries to get a hold of you on Route 30, they can't get you because there isn't the capacity to have that service available. And I think that's a key thing because I think more people will use those facilities and come and maybe buy a house and use part of it as an office and work so that they go back to the city or to Connecticut or wherever it is just on weekends or on 1 or 2 days a week. And we can attract a lot of people because of our all-around climate and our all-around facilities that we do have, skiing and etc.
So we can have the environment looking similar to how we've preserved it over the years, but allow access for people to, at least on a part-time basis, connect with more urban areas and their own work.
That's right.
And do you see this as one of Governor Shumlin's commitments or the legislature's priorities?
Well, I see that they're very interested in trying to do something. They've got some legislation in to do that, and I know the governor has talked about improving the broadband capacity.
Yes, but have they called you for advice yet?
No, they haven't. I'm kind of an old shoe, and I think that the legislature, as it exists, I think it's good because they have a lot of young people, and they have a great diversity between male and female. When I was there were very few women as compared to the number of men. And in the House, we used to have quite a few farmers. I don't think there are as many farmers in the House, and I think that's basically because there aren't many farmers in Vermont now, which is too bad. But I think maybe that's an area that improvement can be made, and hopefully we can increase the farming population, and that keeps our land open too.
Right. So politically, the landscape, so I hear, has changed over the decades. And if I recall, my history lesson, Vermont used to be predominantly Republican.
That's correct.
And that is not your persuasion, certainly, over the years.
That's right.
And so tell us about that. When did Vermont shift, and what do you see, or what have you seen as a result of this shift?
Well, I think politically, probably the first major shift that I was around for and saw was in 1947, the war ended, and Governor Gibson, who lived here in town, ran against Mortimer Proctor, who was a Republican businessman. And Governor Gibson got elected, hadn't served any political station at that time, but he had been, I think, a general or a major in the service, and he came back, and he attracted a lot of people who my father said were basically Democrats. Mm-hmm. They always voted for the Democrats, but the Democrats could never win. They couldn't get enough votes. But they voted for him because he was envisioned as a true person who would be fair, not pro-government, not against government, but would be fair. And he attracted enough votes to upset Mortimer Proctor.
So Governor Gibson ran as a Democrat?
No, he ran as the Republican primary.
Oh, he ran as a Republican.
He ran as a Republican in the Republican primary. And then
in sheep's clothing.
Yes, yes. And he, in those days, you didn't have to specify what primary you were going to vote in. So people went and they voted in the Republican primary. They happened to be Democrats. And then, interestingly enough, he ran against Charlie Ryan, who was the Ryan, Smith, and Carbine. Mm-hmm. Charlie Ryan was an attorney up in Rutland, and he beat Charlie Ryan. Mm-hmm. But it was not unexpected. And since that time, there used to be every year a strong Democratic candidate. Judge Robert Larrow from Burlington ran in the 50s, and probably the next one was Frank Brannon, who was a farmer from up in Fairfield, and they came very close to upsetting the Republicans. And the last one who ran in that era was Judge Bernard Leddy. He was not a judge, he was a practicing lawyer in Burlington, and he lost that race by 700 plus votes, which was the closest, and it was to our senator, who was not senator at the time, Robert Stafford.
Uh-huh.
And that was
200 votes. So we've often had close elections in this state.
That's right.
And why was he called judge if he wasn't a judge?
Well, I refer to him as a judge now. He became a federal court judge.
Oh.
He became a federal court judge because he got elected, or almost elected, and he was appointed by one of the Democratic presidents as a reward for his faithful service to the party.
To the party.
So, and then, of course, 1962 was the big year. And that was when Phil Hoff was truly elected as a Democrat. And we've had some Democratic governors since then. Our own Tom Salmon from up in Bellows Falls was the second person.
One of my earlier memories of my move to Vermont in the early 80s was an attendance at a continuing legal education class. And I sat down at a seat that was open at one of those tables, and there was an older gentleman sitting next to me, and his name tag was Philip Hoff. And I had no idea that he was the former governor of the state. So it was kind of fun and very indicative of what this state is like.
That's
and
right.
The proximity and availability of elected officials.
Yeah. And you know, he was always available. When he was elected, he would come. In fact, sometimes I used to think that he'd just spend his time driving around going to events. But he'd come every year to the Winter Carnival. And he'd come down, and we'd have some events for him to go to. And people would have friends from out of town come because they, you know, it was a nice weekend in winter and the ski jump and everything else. And they could not, they were just dumbfounded with the fact that here's an event in someone's house or down at the Legion or the Elks, and the governor of Vermont is there, and they got a chance to shake hands, and Phil was very cordial. He was a real nice, down-to-earth guy. And they'd go home and they'd say, as they're going out the door, you know, I've lived in New York City all my life. I don't even know the mayor, and I have never seen our governor except on TV. And it's amazing how that
and all those people have since moved, all those New Yorkers have since moved to Vermont.
That's right. That's right. We hope.
Maybe it was a little too friendly. I hope you enjoyed our show and will join us on the next Neighbor to Neighbor. Thank you.